Approximately 70 million deaf people around the world use sign language as their first language. This is according to the World Federation of the Deaf. The month of September marks Deaf Awareness Month with a purpose to increase awareness about deaf issues such as deaf education, communication and access to healthcare and South African Sign Language. To talk more about this, we're joined in studio by Professor Claudine Storbeck. She's a director at the Center for Deaf Studies at Wits University. Good to have you in studio. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you. Thanks, Whit.
How marginalized would you say the deaf community is in South Africa?
Extremely marginalized. It's a silent and invisible disability, so we don't see it.
Yeah.
The blind community, people in wheelchairs, you get to see. But deafness is invisible, and so we forget it.
And that's a reality. And I'm going to fault us right now. I said to you before we went on air, we should at least have sign language for this interview, never mind for our news bulletins. I mean, that should be something that is there, it's standard, and we should be doing, but we're not. So that just goes to show that we are dropping the ball when it comes to this.
That's right. And in September, with the deaf awareness, so much media attention is created, and yet the one population that cannot access it at all, radio, TV, is the deaf community themselves.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges? I mean, talk to us about the challenges that deaf people go through on a daily basis.
I mean, well, from day one, deaf people are diagnosed late. So if you're diagnosed late, late amplification and late relationships with your parents. When you acquire a language late, you're probably not going to acquire your mother tongue effectively, so you're really cut off from your family and family events. You don't know your culture. And then, of course, deaf education is challenging. Our teachers aren't sufficiently trained, or those that are being trained because they want to be, not because they're required to be trained. And then it's difficult getting a job when people are scared of you, when people don't trust that you can actually do the job. And there is this terrible myth about being deaf and dumb. And they are just deaf, not deaf and dumb.
It's a stigma, and it's an age-old stigma that I suppose has been almost impossible to shake off, even though in this day and age where so much is accepted. And, you know, we pride ourselves as human that we're becoming a lot more acceptive about everything. And yet you look at a deaf population that is still struggling for acceptance and to shake off the stereotypes. What more needs to be done? Education, perhaps?
Well, I think government needs to require that teachers of the deaf are trained as a requirement, like every other country in the world. You can't just walk into a school and start teaching. And number two, I think we need to have much earlier identification and giving deaf people the opportunity to actually become teachers of the deaf, become teacher assistants, and getting them involved in their own decision-making about their lives.
Human rights. I mean, it's a basic human right we're talking about. But I think a lot of the time the human rights of the deaf population are being abused. And that's a very big statement for me to make. But perhaps you can give me a little bit more clarity. I mean, we talk about sign language. We talk about exactly what you're saying, these perceptions that are not right. But how would you describe it? Human rights violations or not really?
Human rights neglect, for sure.
Okay.
And neglect is partly an abuse. In South Africa, where we're this rainbow nation, one would expect it to be far easier because the deaf community is a social and cultural linguistic group. They have their own language, and sign language is an official language that has linguistic rules and regulations. It's not just mime and gesture. And in a country that is so multicultural, deaf culture is just a regular culture, so they don't even see themselves as disabled. But it's access at the smaller things. You know, if you're going to a meeting at work, having an interpreter at a meeting. We work with deaf-blind people, and for a deaf-blind person to be able to get access to information is such a challenge. You mentioned a bit earlier when it comes to early detection, and that's where we're dropping the ball. I remember when but then again, I'm talking maybe private healthcare, and also I elected to have this and paid extra, that they did a hearing test as my baby was born. So I don't know if that's procedural or not, because I don't think it is. No. International protocol is that it is procedural for all babies born. In South Africa, that's not yet the case. We really are fighting that, but at the same time recognizing that South Africa has bigger challenges. But this is such an easy one to intervene in. You know, you early screening, You diagnose, identify, they can get hearing aids and intervention and sign language and good education. And you know, you invest in the first 2 years of life, deaf people then become employable, tax-paying, contributing members of the society, as opposed to a drain if they aren't able to do that.
Yeah, and that's something that I think really needs to be looked at, and we do implore government to perhaps look at that and say, look, you know, let's make that legislation that we have to be tested from the day we are born. Early detection, though, signs to look out for. Perhaps we can give some advice to parents, because as you stated, it's not the law right now.
You know, at Wits we've done some interesting research that even if we didn't have screening in place, if pediatricians just listened to the mother and her gut sense that something was wrong, babies would have been identified at least 12 months earlier than they currently are. Wow. So it just... when your child is not turning to sound, there's just something that's worrying you in terms of them being different from others. They stop babbling typically at about 7 months. The babbling changes. It is not like anyone else's. And yet they're alert because they're so visual. So sometimes it's actually, they don't look deaf because they turn quicker to shadows and any type of vibration. But when your gut says something is bothering you, follow it up.
Yeah, and get it checked out.
Yeah.
Mothers, that stands for everything.
That's right.
I think there is nothing more than that mother's instinct, that gut feeling that a mother gets.
Yeah.
Family, community. I mean, I think we've touched on family and also community and helping the deaf community and getting the sign language going.
Yeah, you know, again, in South Africa, we're an expressive nation. We use our hands. If you don't know how to communicate, don't just walk away. Try.
Yeah.
You know, just reach out and do a bit of mime and gesture. The big thing for families is when you find out that your child has a hearing loss, even with the technology that we have, there is grief, there is shock, and there is trauma. And in addition to being a mother that's just given birth with all that hormonal stuff happening, to now have that big loss of your dream for your baby is very huge. And that's what we then provide, is a home-based program where we just walk that journey with families to just get through that time of huge challenge.
Yeah. And how do people get hold of you? What is sort of protocol?
Yeah, I mean, you can search online for the Wits Centre for Deaf Studies. You can phone the Wits number and just phone and say, I want to talk to the people in deafness. They'll put you through. There's a program called High Hopes, High Hopes, because you want to give families high hopes when you've got a child with hearing loss and any other disability, really. Parents just need support. Talk to people. And if you know someone who's going to be having a baby soon or who has just had a baby soon, just encourage that screening. It's a small investment that's really going to make a huge difference.
All right. Thank you for talking to us.
That's a pleasure.
I know it's an entire month that the focus will be on deaf education, communication, access to healthcare. It's Deaf Awareness Month here in South Africa. It's a global. Is this a global awareness campaign?
Global awareness campaign, and on Friday we have the World Federation for the Deaf joining us.
Excellent.
For a very big event. So yes.
Fantastic. Keep us updated. I hope it goes well, and let's see what we can do to try and just make it easier for the deaf community here in South Africa. Professor Claudine Storbeck, Director of Centre for Deaf Studies at Wits University. Let's take a break.